The stars stretched endlessly across the viewport of the mining station. Hyunwoo wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked out at the darkness. He had been hauling ore for 15 years now, flying his old freighter between colonies that most people forgot existed. The work was hard, the pay was poor, but it was honest. Tonight, the other miners gathered in the common room after their shifts ended. They were tired, their bodies aching, but they still found energy to talk and laugh. Someone started telling stories the way they always did. Stories about the old days, stories about humans. They say humans could survive anything, old Taman said, his scales gleaming under the dim lights. He was Vexari, one of the reptilian species that helped form the Galactic Coalition. They fought in the Great Silence War, thousands of years ago. Fought like demons, never gave up, never surrendered. Hyunwoo smiled but said nothing. He had heard these stories 100 times. Every frontier colony had them. Tales of warriors from Earth, a planet no one could find anymore. Ships that could take impossible damage and keep fighting. Soldiers who would charge into certain death without hesitation. It was all fantasy, he thought. Just stories to make the work seem less meaningless. Far away on the capital world of Nexus Prime, Minseo stood in the archives. The crystalline walls around her glowed softly, reflecting her own transparent body. She was Korath, a species of living crystal that could touch minds and memories. For years, she had been collecting fragments of information about humans, old data files, fragments of ship logs, stories passed down through generations. Her colleagues thought she was wasting her time. Humans are myths, they told her. Fairy tales. Focus on real history. But Minseo could not let it go. Something in the patterns she found felt true. The stories were too consistent across too many worlds. Different species, different cultures, all telling similar tales about the same mysterious warriors. She had compiled everything into a single database. Maps showing where human encounters were reported, timelines of the Silence War, technical specifications of ships that might have been human designs. It was not enough to prove anything, but it was enough to make her believe. Commander Jiho stood on the bridge of his warship, the Endless Dawn. He was a career military officer, 40 years of service behind him. He had fought pirates, stopped smugglers, and kept the peace in a dozen systems. The coalition had been at peace for 3 centuries, and officers like Jiho were the reason why. He did not believe in myths. He believed in training, discipline, and following proper procedures. When younger officers talked about humans during their breaks, he would shut down the conversation. "Focus on your duties," he would say. "Legends do not win battles. Preparation does." But even Jiho had to admit that the coalition had grown comfortable. Too comfortable, perhaps. They had no real enemies. No one had challenged them in generations. The military was more for show than for actual fighting. He wondered sometimes if they would be ready if a real threat appeared. The answer came sooner than anyone expected. The distress signal reached Nexus Prime on a quiet afternoon. A colony called Helion 7 was under attack, not by pirates or rebels, but by something new, something the sensors could barely identify. The reports were confused and frightening. Ships destroyed in seconds, defenses that had never failed suddenly useless. An enemy that adapted to every tactic, learned from every engagement. They called them the Dravok Swarm, biomechanical creatures that moved like insects but fought like machines. They consumed everything in their path, breaking down matter to create more of themselves. 3 colonies had already gone silent. Now they were at Helion 7 and the miners there were fighting for their lives. Jiho took his fleet and jumped to hyperspace immediately. 12 ships, the best the coalition had. They arrived at Helion 7 expecting to find a battle. Instead, they found a massacre. The colony's defensive platforms were destroyed. Civilian ships fled in panic. And filling the space around the planet was a swarm of creatures unlike anything Jiho had ever seen. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. They moved together like a single organism, flowing around obstacles, surrounding prey. When Jiho's ships opened fire, the Dravok shields adapted within minutes. Energy weapons that should have cut through them barely left marks. "Fall back to defensive formation," Jiho ordered. His mind raced through tactical options. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this. The Dravok were not like any enemy he had studied. They did not retreat. They did not negotiate. They just consumed and adapted and kept coming. Hyunwoo was on Helion 7 when the attack started. He had been loading ore into his freighter when the alarm sounded. Now he watched from orbit as his friends, his colleagues, the people he had worked with for years, tried desperately to evacuate. But there were too many, Dravok. Not everyone would escape. The Coalition fleet fought bravely. They followed their training, executed their maneuvers perfectly, but it was not enough. Ship after ship took damage. Jiho watched his tactical display with growing horror as he realized the truth. They were going to lose. The Dravok were too many, too adaptable. In another hour, maybe less, the fleet would be destroyed. He prepared to give the evacuation order. At least they could save some people. It would be a defeat, a terrible one, but survival mattered more than pride. Then the sensors detected something impossible. A ship appeared from nowhere, materializing out of a spatial distortion that should not exist. It was small compared to Coalition vessels, built with strange angles and covered in armor plating. Weapons covered its hull, primitive-looking kinetic cannons instead of modern energy beams. The design was ancient, inefficient, completely wrong by every standard Jiho knew, and it was broadcasting a message. The translation took a few moments. The language was old, something the computers had to search deep archives to identify. When the words finally appeared on Jiho's screen, he felt his breath catch. "This is the Terran expeditionary ship Indomitable. We received your distress call. We are here to help. Hold the line, Terran." The ancient word for human Jiho stared at the impossible ship. Around him, his bridge crew fell silent. In the archives on Nexus Prime, alarms began to sound as computers matched the ship's configuration to fragments in Minseo's database. On Helion 7, Hyunwoo watched through his freighter's viewport as the myth became real. The human ship did not wait for permission or acknowledgement. It simply dove straight into the thickest part of the Dravok swarm and opened fire. Missiles and bullets and explosions filled the space where elegant energy beams should have been. It flew like nothing Jiho had ever seen, rolling and spinning, taking hits that should have destroyed it but somehow staying intact. And for the first time since the battle began, the Dravok started to fall back. Humanity was not a myth anymore. The human ship moved through the Dravok swarm like a knife through water. Jiho watched in disbelief as it executed maneuvers that would tear apart any Coalition vessel. It spun, rolled, used the planet's gravity to slingshot around obstacles. When Dravok drones surrounded it, the ship did not try to escape. It rammed straight through them. "What kind of pilot flies like that?" his tactical officer whispered. Jiho had no answer. The human ship was taking damage. He could see the armor scorched and torn, but it kept fighting. Its weapons were primitive but effective. The kinetic rounds punched through Dravok's shields that energy beams could barely scratch. Explosions rippled through the swarm as missiles found their targets. The Dravok seemed confused. They were used to fighting organized fleets that followed predictable patterns. The human ship was chaos. It appeared in one place, struck hard, then vanished before the Dravok could respond. It drew their attention, pulled them away from the damaged Coalition ships, created openings that Jiho's fleet could exploit. "All ships, focus fire on the gaps," Jiho ordered. He was a professional. If this mysterious ally was giving them a chance, he would use it. The Coalition fleet pressed forward, their precise energy weapons cutting through Dravok formations while the human ship kept the enemy off balance. An hour later, the Dravok began to retreat. Not because they were defeated, but because they recognized they could not win quickly here. The swarm pulled back, leaving behind thousands of destroyed drones. The colony was saved, though barely. The human ship, battered and smoking, requested permission to dock with the Endless Dawn. Jiho granted it immediately. He needed to know who these people were, what they wanted, and how they had appeared from nowhere. The docking bay crew watched nervously as the human ship settled into place. It was smaller than they expected, built for war rather than exploration. Scorch marks covered the hull. Repair patches showed this was not its first battle. On the side, written in strange letters, was a name, Indomitable. The airlock opened. 5 figures emerged, wearing armor that looked heavy and uncomfortable. They moved with military precision, weapons holstered but ready. The leader stepped forward and removed her helmet. Jiho stared. She looked remarkably like the Vexari or Thryn might if they had no scales or chitin. Smooth skin, hair on her head, 2 eyes, a face that somehow expressed intelligence and determination. She was smaller than he expected, not particularly impressive physically, but her eyes held something that made him pause. Experience, pain, and an absolute refusal to give up. "I am Commander Tajin of the Terran Expeditionary Force," she said through a translator device. "Thank you for allowing us aboard. We have been watching from the edges of known space for some time. When we detected the Dravok attacking Coalition worlds, we knew we had to act." "Terran," Jiho repeated slowly. "Human?" "Yes." Tajin smiled, though it did not quite reach her eyes. "We know you thought we were extinct. Or perhaps just a legend. We let you think that while we rebuilt. After Earth was damaged in the catastrophe, we needed time to recover. But we never forgot our old allies. The Coalition species fought beside us in the Silence War. We could not abandon you now." The humans were taken to a conference room. Jiho called for his senior officers and sent an urgent message to Nexus Prime. Within hours, scholars and politicians would be arriving. But for now, he needed to understand what was happening. Tajin explained their history. Thousands of years ago, during the Silence War, humans and Coalition species had fought together against a terrible enemy. The war was won, but at a terrible cost. Earth, the human homeworld, was devastated. The damage was so severe that humans had to abandon space exploration completely. They focused everything on survival, on healing their wounded planet. "For 3,000 years we lived on Earth and nowhere else," Tajin said quietly. "Entire generations were born and died knowing they would never reach the stars. But we kept the dream alive. We kept the stories of the Coalition, of the Great Alliance, and finally 50 years ago we were ready to return." "Why hide?" Jiho asked. "Why not contact us immediately?" "We were not sure how you would react. We were weak, few in number, still recovering. We needed to observe, to understand what the galaxy had become in our absence. And we wanted to be sure that when we revealed ourselves we could offer something valuable, not just asking for help but providing it." Another human stepped forward, younger than Tajin, with curiosity bright in her eyes. "I am Dr. Yuna, Chief Science Officer. We have been studying the Dravok for several months. We believe they are related to the enemy from the Silence War. Not the same, but similar. Biomechanical, adaptive, consuming. If we are right, then your energy weapons will never be fully effective against them. They are designed to absorb and redirect energy, but kinetic weapons, physical force, those they cannot adapt to as easily." "You knew we were in danger," Jiho said, a hint of accusation in his voice. "You watched and did nothing until now." Tajin met his gaze steadily. "We had one ship ready for combat. One. The rest of our fleet is still being built. We could not save every colony, but we could save this one. And now that we have revealed ourselves, we can coordinate, share information, fight together the way our ancestors did." A message arrived from Nexus Prime. Minseo was coming, along with a delegation of Coalition leaders. They wanted to meet the humans immediately. The myths were real, and the galaxy was trying to understand what that meant. In the meantime, the humans integrated with the Endless Dawn's crew. They were fascinated by Coalition technology, asking endless questions about energy systems and faster-than-light travel. In return, they shared their own knowledge, armor designs, weapon configurations, tactics developed during centuries of desperate survival. Lieutenant Daehyun, the pilot who had flown the Indomitable, became particularly popular. He was young, confident, and skilled. When Coalition pilots asked how he learned to fly like that, he laughed. "When you grow up on a damaged world where every resource matters, you learn to make impossible things work. And when you finally get a ship, you do not waste the opportunity. You push it to the absolute limit." Hyunwoo met the humans during a tour of the Endless Dawn. He had evacuated from Helion 7 along with the other miners, and now waited for news about when they could return. When he saw Tajin in the corridor, he approached cautiously. "I heard stories about your people my whole life," he said. "Never thought they were true." Tajin studied him, then smiled genuinely this time. "What did the stories say?" "That humans never gave up. That you fought impossible odds and somehow won. That you could survive anything." "The stories were not entirely accurate," Tajin admitted. "We gave up plenty of times. We lost more often than we won. And many of us did not survive. But enough of us kept going, kept fighting, kept hoping. Maybe that is what matters. Not being unbeatable, but being unwilling to stay beaten." 3 days later, Minseo arrived with the Coalition delegation. When she saw the humans, when she touched their minds with her telepathic abilities and felt the truth of their history, she wept. Tears of crystal that fell like diamonds. Her life's work was validated. Everything she had believed was real. But there was no time for celebration. Intelligence reports brought dark news. The attack on Helion 7 was just a probe, a test. The main Dravok swarm was gathering at the edge of Coalition space. Millions of drones, perhaps billions. They would strike the heart of Coalition territory within weeks. Tajin stood before the Coalition Council and made an offer. We have a fleet, 37 ships all designed for war. We have been preparing for something like this since we returned to space. If you will trust us, if you will fight beside us, we can help. But you must understand, we fight differently than you do. Our tactics will seem reckless. Our losses will be high, but we will give you a chance to win. The council deliberated for hours. Finally, they agreed. The alliance that had been broken 3,000 years ago would be reforged. Human and Coalition fighting together once more. The war had truly begun. The human fleet arrived 3 days later, and it shocked everyone who saw it. 37 ships emerged from hyperspace above Nexus Prime, the Coalition capital world. They were not beautiful like Coalition vessels. They were brutal, covered in thick armor plates and weapon systems. Every ship bore scars from previous battles, dents and burn marks that told stories of survival. Each ship had a name painted on its hull: Defiant, Retribution, Last Stand, Unbreakable, Remember Earth. These were not names chosen to inspire confidence and peace. These were names chosen for war. Admiral Sujin commanded the fleet from her flagship Remember Earth. She was an older woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much fighting. When she met with the Coalition leadership, she spoke plainly. We are not here to take over or tell you what to do. We are here because we remember what it feels like to face extinction. No one should face that alone. But integration proved difficult. The Coalition military had spent 3 centuries perfecting defensive tactics, careful maneuvers, and minimal casualties. Human tactics were aggressive, direct, and accepted heavy losses if it meant achieving objectives. During joint training exercises, Coalition officers watched in horror as human ships deliberately damaged themselves to complete simulations. You treat your people like they do not matter, Jiho said angrily after one particularly brutal exercise. 3 human ships had been destroyed in the simulation, along with hundreds of crew members if it had been real. Dae-hyun, now working as a liaison officer between the fleets, met Jiho's anger calmly. Every person in our fleet volunteered knowing they might die. We do not expect to survive. We expect to win. There is a difference, and that is insane, Jiho replied. Maybe, Dae-hyun admitted, but it works. You build ships to last forever. You train crews to survive. We build ships to fight. We train crews to win. Both approaches have value. But when facing an enemy like the Dravok, survival is not enough. You have to be willing to pay the price for victory. Hyunwoo found himself spending more time with the humans than with his own people. They fascinated him. During breaks, he would visit the human ships and talk with their crews. They told him about Earth, about the centuries of struggle after the catastrophe. Cities destroyed, ecosystems collapsed, billions dead, and yet humanity endured. We were born knowing our world was dying, one young crew member told him. Every generation sacrificed so the next could have something better. My great-great-grandmother never saw the sky cleared of ash. My grandmother lived in underground shelters. My mother saw the first new forests, and I got to leave Earth and reach the stars. We owe everything to those who came before us, fighting for the Coalition, helping you survive. It honors their sacrifice. Min-seo worked closely with Dr. Yuna, combining Coalition historical records with human archives. Together, they pieced together the true history of the Silence War. The enemy from that ancient conflict was something terrible, something both sides had tried to forget. The Dravok, they realized, were likely a remnant or evolution of that old threat. If we are right, Yuna said quietly one evening, then this is not a new war. It is the old war starting again, and this time we need to finish it completely. The plan came together over 2 weeks of intense collaboration. Colonel Yoonji, a human strategic officer, worked with Coalition planners to develop something that used the strengths of both sides. The Dravok were gathering at the edge of Coalition space, preparing for a massive assault. Instead of waiting for them to attack, the combined fleet would strike first. The target was the Kepler Nebula, a region of space filled with gas clouds and asteroid fields. It was perfect for an ambush. The Coalition fleet would engage the Dravok directly, using their precise tactics and superior energy shields to hold the line. This would look like a conventional battle, exactly what the Dravok expected. Meanwhile, human strike teams would use stealth ships to infiltrate the swarm. Their mission was to find and destroy the central coordinator nodes, the intelligence that directed the entire Dravok force. Without coordination, the swarm would become just individual drones far easier to defeat. It was risky. The strike teams would face overwhelming odds with minimal support. The coalition fleet would take heavy casualties holding the line. But if everything worked, they could destroy the Dravok swarm completely. I do not like this plan, Jiho admitted to Sujin during a private meeting. Too many things can go wrong. Too many people will die. Sujin nodded slowly. I do not like it either. But do you have a better option? The Dravok are coming regardless. We can wait for them to attack, fight defensively, and probably lose. Or we can take the fight to them, control the battlefield, and have a chance to win. It is not a good choice. But it is the only choice we have. Personal bonds began forming despite the cultural differences. Jiho found himself respecting Sujin even though he disagreed with her methods. She had lost her entire family in the catastrophe that damaged Earth. She fought not just for victory, but to honor their memory. Every battle is personal for us, she told him one evening. We are not reckless. We are desperate to prove we deserve to survive. Daehyun and Hyunwoo became genuine friends. The human pilot was impressed by how instinctively the Thrien understood ship systems. Your people evolved for space, Daehyun observed. My people are just stubborn enough to adapt. They spent hours together, Daehyun teaching Hyunwoo combat flying techniques, Hyunwoo showing Daehyun the tricks freighter pilots use to survive dangerous routes. Minseo grew close to Yuna. They shared a love of knowledge, a curiosity about the universe. They worked late into the night, comparing notes, discussing theories. When Yuna learned that Minseo had been mocked for believing in humans, she was outraged. You were right and they were wrong. They should apologize. Minseo laughed, her crystalline body chiming softly. Being right is enough. I do not need apologies. I just needed to know the truth. As the day of battle approached, both fleets prepared in their own ways. Coalition crews ran system checks, verified supply lines, ensured every procedure was followed perfectly. Human crews told stories, remembered the dead, sang old Earth songs that no one else understood. The night before departure, Taijin addressed the combined fleet over the communication system. Her words were translated into every coalition language. Tomorrow we face an enemy that wants to erase everything we have built, everything we are. The coalition has stood for peace for centuries. Humanity fought for survival for millennia. Tomorrow we fight together, not as myths or legends, but as allies. Win or lose, we will show the galaxy what it means to stand united. Jiho stood on the bridge of the Endless Dawn, now equipped with both coalition and human weapon systems. The modifications looked strange, but tests proved they worked. He thought about his career, all the years of peacekeeping and patrol. He had never expected to fight a real war, but as he looked at the fleet assembling around him, human and coalition ships flying side by side, he felt something unexpected. Hope. They might actually survive this. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Nexus Prime behind. Ahead lay the Kepler Nebula and the Dravok swarm. Ahead lay the battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. On the human ship Phantom, Taejin checked her equipment one final time. Beside her, Daehyun prepared the stealth systems. Minseo adjusted her environmental suit, nervous but determined. Hyunwoo, who had volunteered against all advice, made sure the ship's systems were running perfectly. Everyone ready? Taejin asked. They nodded. There was nothing more to say. They were as ready as they would ever be. The Dravok were waiting. The Kepler Nebula was beautiful and deadly. Gas clouds glowed in shades of purple and blue, lit by distant stars. Asteroids drifted through the haze, some as small as ships, others as large as moons. The combined fleet arrived 3 days before the Dravok, using the time to prepare their ambush. Jiho watched from the Endless Dawn as coalition engineers placed mines throughout the nebula. Human technicians rigged asteroids with explosives. Both sides worked together, combining their expertise. The nebula would become a trap, and the Dravok would be the prey. The strike teams prepared in silence. Taejin led the primary team aboard the Phantom, a human stealth ship designed to avoid detection. Daehyun would pilot, using every trick he knew to navigate through the swarm. Minseo had insisted on joining despite the danger. Her telepathic abilities might help them find the coordinator nodes. Hyunwoo was there too, his freighter experience potentially useful in tight spaces. Remember, Taejin told her team, once we are inside the swarm, communication will be nearly impossible. If the Dravok generate too much interference, we will be on our own. Trust your training, trust each other, and if something goes wrong, complete the mission anyway. The fleet is counting on us. The Dravok arrived like a nightmare. Sensors detected them hours before they appeared. A darkness spreading across space. Then they emerged from hyperspace. Millions of biomechanical drones moving as a single organism. They filled the nebula, blotting out stars, a living wall of death. All ships, battle stations, Sujin ordered from Remember Earth. Hold your fire until they are in optimal range. Make them come to us. The Dravok did not hesitate. They flowed into the nebula without caution, confident in their numbers. When they reached firing range, coalition ships opened up with precise energy beams. Thousands of drones died in the first volley, but thousands more replaced them immediately. The battle began in earnest. Coalition tactics were methodical, each ship positioned to support the others, creating overlapping fields of fire. They made the Dravok pay for every meter of space. But the swarm kept coming, adapting to the energy weapons, their shields growing stronger with each minute. Then the human ships entered the fight. They charged forward aggressively, breaking formation to engage at close range. Nuclear missiles exploded in brilliant flashes. Kinetic rounds tore through Dravok armor. Where coalition ships fought with precision, human ships fought with fury. They're going to get themselves killed, Jiho's tactical officer said, watching a human destroyer charge directly into a cluster of drones. They know what they are doing, Jiho replied, though he was not entirely sure he believed it. But he had to trust the plan. While the main fleet held the Dravok's attention, the strike teams would do their work. Inside the swarm, the Phantom moved like a ghost. Daehyun flew with absolute concentration, threading between drones so close that Hyunwoo could see their biomechanical components through the viewport. One wrong move, one moment of detection, and they would be swarmed instantly. There, Minseo said, her telepathic senses reaching out. I feel it. The coordinator node, that way. Daehyun adjusted course, diving deeper into the swarm. The density of drones increased until they were flying through what seemed like solid mass. It should have been impossible, but Daehyun made it. Possible through skill and instinct, finding paths that should not exist. Back in the main battle, the situation was deteriorating. Coalition ships were taking heavy damage. Energy shields held, but barely. 3 ships had already been destroyed. 5 more were crippled and falling back. The Dravok were adapting faster than expected. We cannot hold this position much longer, Jiho reported to Sujin. We need to fall back to secondary positions. Not yet, Sujin replied. The strike teams need more time. We hold the line. A human battleship, the Defiant, suddenly accelerated forward. It rammed into the thickest concentration of Dravok drones, weapons firing in all directions. Jiho watched in horror as the ship took catastrophic damage. It should have retreated. Instead, it kept pushing forward. Defiant. Pull back, Sujin ordered. Negative, the Defiant's captain replied calmly. We are creating an opening. Use it. The ship exploded moments later, taking thousands of Dravok with it. But the sacrifice created a gap in the swarm's formation. Coalition ships poured fire into the opening, destroying coordinator nodes that had been protected. The Dravok's coordination faltered briefly. Deep inside the swarm, the Phantom reached the central coordinator nexus. It was massive, a biomechanical structure that pulsed with energy. Around it, elite warrior drones stood guard, larger and deadlier than the standard units. This is it, Taejin said. Everyone ready? They launched from the Phantom in environmental suits carrying explosives and weapons. The moment they left the ship, the warrior drones detected them. The battle became close and brutal. Taejin fought with practiced efficiency, her weapon dropping drones with precise shots, but there were too many. Yuna, who had insisted on joining the mission to study the Dravok, took a hit protecting Minseo. The warrior drone's blade pierced her suit, and she fell. Minseo caught her, and Yuna looked up with pain-filled eyes. "Neural cascade," Yuna gasped, blood on her lips. "Overload the communication nodes. Feedback loop. Use my research data." She pressed a data chip into Minseo's hand. "Finish it." She died moments later. Minseo held her friend's body, grief washing over her. But there was no time to mourn. She activated the data chip, uploading Yuna's research to the team's systems. It showed the coordinator's weakness, a vulnerability in how it processed information. "Plant the charges on these specific nodes," Minseo said, her voice breaking but steady. "Create a feedback loop. It will cascade through the entire network." The team moved fast, Taejin covering them while Hyunwoo and the others placed explosives. Daehyun held back waves of warrior drones, his ammunition running low. They were barely going to make it. "Charges set," Hyunwoo reported. "Everyone back to the Phantom," Taejin ordered. "Move." They ran, fighting their way back to the stealth ship. The Phantom's engines were damaged, barely functional. Daehyun pushed the controls, coaxing every bit of power from the dying systems. Behind them, the charges detonated. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The neural cascade tore through the coordinator nexus, overloading every communication pathway. The feedback loop spread outward through the swarm like wildfire. Coordinator nodes throughout the Dravok force began failing. Outside, the main battle transformed instantly. The Dravok swarm lost cohesion. Drones stopped adapting, stopped coordinating. They continued fighting, but now they were individuals, not a unified intelligence. "All ships advance," Sujin ordered. "Hit them now." The combined fleet surged forward. Coalition precision and human aggression combined into devastating effect. Without coordination, the Dravok fell by the thousands. Ships that had been struggling to hold the line now pushed forward, reclaiming space, destroying enemies. The Phantom limped out of the swarm, engines failing, life support critical. Daehyun nursed it back to the fleet, flying on instinct and sheer determination. When they finally docked with the endless dawn, the ship was barely holding together. The battle continued for hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Dravok swarm, once an unstoppable force, was being systematically destroyed. By the time the last drones fled into deep space, the victory was absolute. But the cost was terrible. 14 coalition ships destroyed, 23 crippled, 9 human ships lost, including the Defiant, thousands dead, and among them, Dr. Yuna, whose sacrifice had made victory possible. Taejin stood in the memorial hall of Remember Earth, looking at the wall of names. Yuna's was freshly added along with hundreds of others. She placed her hand on the wall, feeling the cold metal. "We won," she whispered. "Because of you. Because of all of you." The galaxy would remember this battle, would remember the price of survival, and would remember that humanity, once thought to be myths, had proven themselves real in the most definitive way possible, through blood and sacrifice, and absolute determination to never give up. The Kepler Nebula was beautiful and deadly. Gas, clouds glowed in shades of purple and blue, lit by distant stars. Asteroids drifted through the haze, some as small as ships, others as large as moons. The combined fleet arrived 3 days before the Dravok, using the time to prepare their ambush. Jiho watched from the endless dawn as coalition engineers placed mines throughout the nebula. Human technicians rigged asteroids with explosives. Both sides worked together, combining their expertise. The nebula would become a trap, and the Dravok would be the prey. The strike teams prepared in silence. Taejin led the primary team aboard. The Phantom, a human stealth ship designed to avoid detection. Daehyun would pilot, using every trick he knew to navigate through the swarm. Minseo had insisted on joining despite the danger. Her telepathic abilities might help them find the coordinator nodes. Hyunwoo was there too, his freighter experience potentially useful in tight spaces. "Remember," Taejin told her team, "once we are inside the swarm, communication will be nearly impossible. The Dravok generate too much interference. We will be on our own. Trust your training. Trust each other." And if something goes wrong, complete the mission anyway. The fleet is counting on us. 3 months passed before the galaxy truly understood what had changed. The Battle of Kepler Nebula was over, but its effects rippled through every system, every colony, every world that had lived in peace for so long. The victory celebration on Nexus Prime was bittersweet. Ships from both fleets gathered in orbit, battered but proud. The Coalition Council formally recognized humanity as an equal member species. The first edition in 3 centuries. Taijin stood beside Jiho at the ceremony, both of them wearing dress uniforms, both carrying the weight of command and loss. "We were myths to you," Taijin said during her speech. "And you were legends to us. Stories our grandparents told about the great alliance that once existed. Today we make those stories real again, not through war this time, but through peace." The crowd applauded, thousands of beings from different species united in celebration. But Taijin knew the real work was just beginning. Winning a battle was one thing. Building lasting peace was far more difficult. Jiho had been promoted to admiral and appointed to the Coalition Military Council. His first task was integrating human tactical doctrine into Coalition forces. It was harder than he expected. The cultures were too different, the philosophies too opposed. Coalition officers emphasized preservation of life above all else. Human officers accepted sacrifice as necessary for victory. "We need to find middle ground," he told Sujin during one of their many planning sessions. "Take the best of both approaches. Use Coalition precision with human adaptability. Protect lives while still achieving objectives." Sujin nodded thoughtfully. "It will take time. Generations, perhaps. But we have time now. Thanks to everyone who fought, who died. We have a future to build." They worked together on a new military doctrine, combining their expertise. Jiho's careful planning with Sujin's aggressive strategies. Coalition energy weapons with human kinetic systems. Defensive positions with offensive capability. It was imperfect, but it was progress. Minseo threw herself into her work, trying to fill the void left by Yuna's death. She established the Human Coalition Cultural Exchange Institute, dedicated to helping both sides understand each other. The work was difficult. Too many differences, too many misunderstandings. Coalition citizens struggled to comprehend human willingness to sacrifice. Humans found Coalition caution frustrating. Arguments broke out regularly, sometimes even fights. But slowly understanding began to grow. Coalition people learned about Earth's long recovery, the centuries of struggle that shaped human psychology. Humans learned about the Coalition's peaceful history, the civilization built on cooperation rather than conflict. Daehyun transitioned from military to diplomatic service, working with Minseo. His easy charm and genuine curiosity helped bridge gaps that formal diplomacy could not. He spent time on different Coalition worlds, learning their cultures, teaching them about humanity. His reports to Taijin were optimistic but realistic. "They want to understand us," he wrote, "but fear holds them back. They see our willingness to fight and die, and it scares them. They wonder if we will turn that aggression toward them someday. We need to prove we are allies, not just warriors." Hyunwoo returned to freighter work, but the mining guild was different now. The frontier colonies had seen the Dravok threat firsthand. They understood the galaxy was not as safe as they had believed. Hyunwoo began training other freighter captains in combat techniques, not because he expected them to fight, but because being prepared was simply smart. His friendship with Daehyun continued despite the distance. They communicated regularly, sharing stories and advice. "You taught me that courage is not about being fearless," Hyunwoo told him during one conversation. "It is about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway." Daehyun laughed. "And you taught me that sometimes the smartest move is knowing when to run." Both lessons are valuable. Earth became a pilgrimage site for Coalition citizens. They traveled there to see the world that had produced humanity, to understand the struggle that shaped them. They walked through restored cities, visited memorials to the billions who died in the catastrophe, stood in museums that documented the long recovery. Most came away changed. They saw the scars Earth still carried, the damage that would never fully heal. They understood why humans fought so fiercely. When you have lost everything and rebuilt from ashes, you do not give up easily. You cannot afford to. Meanwhile, humans explored Coalition worlds with wonder, planets that had known peace for centuries, where art and philosophy flourished while humanity struggled to survive. Many humans chose to settle on these worlds, seeking the tranquility their own culture rarely provided. But integration was not without problems. Some coalition citizens resented humanity's sudden appearance and influence. Some humans found coalition society too restrictive, too cautious. Tensions rose in mixed colonies, sometimes erupting into violence. Tajin and the Coalition Council worked constantly to address these issues, mediating disputes, establishing guidelines for coexistence. Change is never easy, Tajin told a group of colonists during one crisis. We have been separated for 3,000 years. We have developed different ways of living, different values, but we share more than what divides us. We all want to survive. We all want our children to have better lives. We all dream of a galaxy at peace. Those common goals matter more than our differences. The technological exchange proved beneficial for both sides. Human innovation merged with coalition precision engineering. Joint research projects pushed into regions of space neither would have dared explore alone. Mixed crews, once unthinkable, became common on exploration vessels. But beneath the progress, a shadow grew. Minseo continued her research into the Silence War, digging deeper into ancient records. What she found disturbed her. The Dravok were not unique. They were only the latest manifestation of something older, something that had threatened the galaxy before. She presented her findings to the Coalition Council in secret. The Silence War was fought against an enemy we tried to forget, something so terrible that both humans and Coalition species agreed to bury the records. The Dravok came from the same source, and my research suggests there is more of it out there, beyond the edge of known space. Deep space monitoring stations began detecting anomalies, strange energy signatures at the galaxy's edge, movements that matched patterns from the ancient war. Something was stirring in the darkness. Jiho and Sujin met privately to discuss the threat. We have years, perhaps decades, Sujin estimated. But it is coming. The question is whether we will be ready. Then we use that time, Jiho replied. We build our forces. We integrate our capabilities. We make sure that when it arrives, it faces a united front, human and coalition fighting as one. 5 years after first contact, the galaxy had transformed. Humanity was no longer a myth whispered in frontier bars, but an integral part of galactic civilization. The stories told about them were based on truth now, not legend, not ancient warriors, but real people who had stood beside coalition forces when it mattered most. On the anniversary of the Battle of Kepler Nebula, a memorial ceremony was held at the battle site. Ships from all coalition species gathered, including a full squadron of human vessels. They fired weapons into space, energy beams and missiles together, honoring the thousands who had died. Tajin stood beside Jiho on the bridge of the endless dawn, watching the lights fade into darkness. We were myths to you, she said quietly. But myths are stories we tell to inspire hope, to remember what matters. Maybe being a myth was not so bad. It meant you still remembered us even when we were gone. Jiho smiled. And now you are real. Which means we do not have to dream about heroes anymore. We have them beside us, he paused. Though I have to admit you are far more annoying in person than the legend suggested. Tajin laughed, a sound that would have been impossible for her before the battle. The feeling is mutual, Admiral. Below them, crew members from both species worked together. They shared meals, compared stories, existed in the peaceful companionship of those who had fought side by side. The differences remained, but they no longer mattered as much. The future would bring new challenges. The threat from beyond the galaxy's edge was real and growing. But for the first time in millennia, humanity and the coalition faced it together. They were no longer myths or legends. They were family. And as every being in the galaxy now knew, you do not abandon family. Ever.